My name is Courtney Vargas. I'm 34 years old, a single mother living in Fort Collins, Colorado. If someone had told me just a year ago that I'd find myself standing at the far end of my younger sister's wedding reception, uninvited to the ceremony, uninvited to the family photos, basically erased from anything that would make the pictures look perfect, sipping lukewarm champagne, while my own parents acted like I was invisible, I probably would have rolled my eyes and laughed it off. Miranda and I used to be close. Not the inseparable type, but the reliable kind, the sister who always answered the phone at 2 a.m., who covered shifts when money was tight, who showed up even when no one else did. Or at least that's what I believed. Then she met Dustin Morales. His family owned a string of luxury resorts scattered across Colorado, high-end places with private mountain views and price tags that made headlines. They had the kind of money that comes with expectations, every frame polished, every guest curated. When they looked at me, a single mom raising a 7-year-old daughter working long hours in finance, driving the same reliable SUV for years, they saw someone who didn't belong in the frame. Not in the bridal party photos. Not during the vows. Not even at the formal seated dinner. They sent the invitation anyway, the generic one that felt like an afterthought, convinced I'd show up looking defeated, head down, proving their point. My parents leaned in close to the guests, whispering just loud enough to be heard. This is the single mother everyone talks about. Eyes flicked my way full of judgment. Champagne flutes clinked in the air, raised with those smug, knowing smiles that said I was the punchline they all expected. Then the double doors at the back of the room swung open. The music faded. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned. The entire room froze the moment I walked in. If you've ever been the one your family tried to hide in the background, smash that like button, subscribe, so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment. Have you ever walked into a room and made them regret underestimating you? Tell me your story below. I read everyone. Let's dive deeper. 15 years ago, when I was still young, life in the suburbs of Fort Collins felt simple and predictable in the best way. Our house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac just off Harmony Road, the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and neighbors exchanged waves over freshly cut lawns. We were close enough to the Poudre River Trail that I could walk there in 20 minutes, following the path where the river ran steady, and the cottonwoods rustled overhead, their leaves turning gold in the fall. The foothills loomed in the distance, always reminding us that the mountains were near, even if our daily lives stayed firmly on level ground. It was a good place to grow up, safe, steady, with that crisp Colorado air that carried the faint scent of pine and promise. I was the older sister, the first one, and somehow that role came with expectations I never questioned. When things got tight, especially during the recession, when Dad's contracting business slowed to a crawl, and Mom started taking every extra shift the hospital would give her, I stepped in without hesitation. I found a part-time job at Odell Brewing right after high school, working evenings and weekends behind the bar, pouring pints for locals who came in after work, wiping down counters, and helping with the occasional inventory count in the back. The money wasn't much, but it was steady, and every paycheck went straight toward the bills that kept stacking up on the kitchen counter. I never asked Mom or Dad to reimburse me. I just handed over what they needed and kept going. School was always a longer road for me. I wanted to study finance to understand how money moved, so I could make sure our family never got caught short again. But tuition wasn't cheap, and when Miranda needed new clothes for school dances, a used car to get to her part-time job, or registration fees for extracurriculars, the family budget always bent in her direction first. So I put college off for 2 full years, working full shifts at the brewery, while she finished high school with the freedom I never had. She got the new phone when hers broke, the name-brand backpack for the first day of senior year, the weekend trips with friends. I got the hand-me-downs, the late nights, and the quiet understanding that my turn would come later. Mom and Dad never made it explicit, but the difference was impossible to miss. Miranda was their golden child, the one who smiled easily, who brought energy into every room, who never seemed burdened by the same weight I carried. They celebrated her straight-A report cards with dinners out at the local steakhouse, signed her up for the more expensive summer programs, and let her focus on cheerleading and social life without the pressure of contributing to the household. I received quiet nods for being so responsible, the occasional pat on the back for covering the electric bill, but never the same warmth or excitement. I told myself it was fine. I was the strong one. I could handle the load. I believed that if I kept showing up, kept sacrificing without complaint, eventually they would see how much I gave. Those years built something inside me that I didn't fully recognize at the time. A slow, steady accumulation of small hurts. The nights I came home exhausted from the brewery, while Miranda laughed with friends on the phone, the times I deferred my own dreams so hers could take center stage, the quiet realization that my contributions were expected while hers were celebrated. I never demanded fairness. I never raised my voice or asked for credit. I simply kept going, convinced that family meant putting others first, even when it meant putting myself last. Looking back now, that was the real beginning. Not the dramatic moment everyone remembers, but the slow erosion of balance that made everything that came later feel almost inevitable. I carried the weight so long that I forgot what it felt like to walk without it. Everything started to change when my younger sister Miranda Delgado got engaged about 18 months before the wedding. She called me one afternoon, her voice full of that bright energy she always had when something big happened, asking if I could come over for dinner that evening because she had news she wanted to share in person. I rearranged my schedule, picked up Cheyenne from after-school care, and drove to Mom and Dad's house expecting a celebration. When I walked in, Dustin Morales was already seated at the dining table, looking completely at ease in the space that used to feel like ours alone. Miranda introduced him with pride, explaining how they had met at a marketing conference in Denver, where he was presenting for his family's company. Dustin worked in promotions for Morales Resorts, a chain of luxury properties scattered across Colorado, high-end mountain lodges, with private spas, exclusive ski access, and rates that catered to executives and celebrities. His parents, Harold and Elena Morales, arrived shortly after stepping out of a polished black SUV that looked more expensive than most houses on our street. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence that comes from never having to worry about the next bill. The dinner began warmly. Mom had prepared her signature lasagna, Dad opened a bottle of red wine, and we all settled around the table. Dustin was polite at first, asking about my work in investment management and listening as I described the patient, detail-oriented approach I took to building long-term portfolios. I appreciated the interest even if it felt a little formal. Miranda sat beside him, her engagement ring sparkling under the light every time she moved her hands, and for a moment I felt genuinely happy for her. She looked so content, so sure of her future. But as the evening went on, the tone shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Dustin's mother looked across the table and said, "You must be exhausted all the time raising your daughter on your own." Her voice carried sympathy, but the words landed like a subtle judgment, as if single motherhood were a condition rather than a choice I had made with strength. I smiled and replied that it had its challenges, but the rewards made it worthwhile. Dustin nodded, then added, "That's admirable. My job in marketing is all about flash events, launches, getting people excited. Investment sounds more behind-the-scenes steady work." The comment hung there, simple on the surface, but heavy with implication. Steady. It wasn't praise. It was a polite way to say, my life lacked excitement, lacked the glamour they valued. Mom quickly steered the conversation back to Miranda's recent promotion at her marketing firm, praising how well she was doing, while Dad busied himself with the wine bottle. I caught the way he avoided looking directly at me, and the room felt suddenly smaller. Later, as we cleared plates, I overheard Dustin's father speaking quietly to Mom in the kitchen. "She's managing well for a single mom." he said, his tone low but carrying through the open doorway. It wasn't meant as encouragement. It was a label one that reduced everything I had accomplished the late nights studying after Cheyenne went to bed, the steady growth of my investment practice to something that required pity rather than respect. I stood in the hallway, dishes in hand, feeling the familiar twist in my chest. I drove home that night with Cheyenne asleep in the back seat, the words replaying in my mind. I had spent years building something solid, something reliable, while quietly supporting everyone around me. Yet in one evening, they made me feel like an outsider in my own family. I tried to focus on the positive: Miranda's happiness, the ring on her finger, the way she glowed when she talked about her future with Dustin. But the subtle dismissals lingered, planting seeds of doubt I couldn't quite shake. In the weeks that followed, the remarks continued in quiet ways. At a family brunch a few days later, Dustin's mother asked if I ever planned to settle down again, as if my current life couldn't possibly be complete. Miranda laughed lightly and changed the subject, but she didn't correct the assumption. I kept my responses calm and gracious, congratulating them on the engagement, asking about wedding plans, trying to stay connected. Inside, though, the distance began to grow. I wanted to share in her joy completely. I wanted to feel included. But every small comment reminded me that in their eyes, I was the sister who didn't quite fit the polished image they were creating. The hurt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, the kind that settles deep and makes you question your place. I told myself it would pass, that new relationships took time to adjust. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The warmth I felt for Miranda's happiness started mixing with a growing sense of exclusion, a realization that the family I had always supported might not see me the way I needed to be seen. As the wedding planning took shape from 6 to 12 months before the big day, the exclusion started to feel deliberate and systematic. It began quietly with the group chat. Miranda set up a dedicated one for the close family to coordinate details, venues, caterers, timelines, and all the little decisions that make an event come together. I waited for the invite link or notification, checking my phone more often than I cared to admit. It never arrived. When I mentioned it casually during a quick call, Miranda laughed lightly and said she must have overlooked me in the rush, promising to add me immediately. She never followed through. The messages continued without me: photos of floral arrangements, vendor quotes, excited updates, but my name remained absent from the participant list. I convinced myself it was a simple mistake amid the chaos of planning, but the silence from that chat began to echo louder than any words. Next came the dress fittings. Miranda planned a special day for the bridal party and Mom to visit a high-end boutique in Denver, trying on gowns and accessories in a private session. I learned about it indirectly when a cousin forwarded a photo of the group outside the store, all smiles and champagne flutes. No invitation had come my way. I texted Miranda asking if there was space for me to join, even just to watch and offer support. Her reply was polite but firm. The appointment was already capped at the maximum number of guests the boutique allowed, and rescheduling wasn't possible. I understood the practical side, or at least I tried to tell myself I did. Yet the pattern was becoming unmistakable: small exclusions that added up, each one explained away, with logic that felt increasingly hollow. The family photo session hit harder. Miranda arranged a professional shoot for the entire extended family: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, to create a large framed portrait that would greet guests at the reception entrance. I found out when Mom mentioned it during a casual Sunday visit. When I asked why I hadn't been included in the booking, Mom hesitated, then said the photographer had recommended keeping the group smaller for better composition and balance. I pressed gently, offering to stand in the back row if needed, but she changed the subject to the caterer's menu options. Dad sat quietly beside her, avoiding eye contact. I left that conversation with a heavy feeling, realizing my presence in the family portrait was no longer automatic. The remarks grew more direct over time. During a casual lunch with Miranda and Mom at a small cafe near Old Town, Miranda pulled up reference photos on her phone, elegant tablescapes with crystal stemware, soft, neutral palettes, timeless black and white details. She turned the screen toward me and said, "We're going for an upscale aesthetic, you know. Your style is so everyday and practical. It might not blend with the overall look." The words were delivered casually, almost as an afterthought, but they landed with precision. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady, asking what she meant by every day. She shrugged and said it was just about cohesion, nothing personal, then moved on to showing Mom a linen sample. Mom nodded in agreement, adding that the photos needed to feel cohesive and polished for the album. I sat there stirring my untouched coffee, the familiar ache returning stronger than before. I tried to address it directly with Mom and Dad a few days later, calling them when I knew they were both home and the house was quiet. I explained calmly that I felt sidelined from the planning and events that I wanted to be involved, but kept being left out. Mom sighed deeply and said, "Don't make it complicated, Courtney. Just let Miranda enjoy this. It's her day." Dad added quietly that they didn't want any tension to spoil the occasion. They didn't acknowledge the group chat, the dress day, the photo session, or the aesthetic comment. They simply asked me to step back so everything could remain smooth. I ended the call feeling diminished, as if my concerns were an inconvenience rather than a valid hurt. The distance widened with every passing month. Invitations to bridal showers arrived through other relatives, never directly from Miranda. When I attended one, the conversation hushed slightly as I entered, then resumed with forced cheer. People were kind enough on the surface, but the warmth felt strained. I smiled, congratulated Miranda again, complimented the registry choices, tried to blend in. Inside, though, the slow erosion of belonging continued. I had always been the one who showed up, who supported without question, who held things together when needed. Now I was being carefully removed piece by piece under the guise of practicality and harmony. The pain wasn't explosive or loud. It was quiet, persistent, the kind that builds until it reshapes how you see your place in the world. I kept telling myself to be understanding, to prioritize my sister's happiness over my own feelings. But each small rejection chipped away at the foundation we had built over years, leaving me wondering how much more I could give before there was nothing left to hold on to. Tension reached its peak just 3 months before the big day. The phone rang one evening while I was helping Cheyenne with her homework at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across her notebook. Miranda's name appeared on the screen, and I answered, expecting another casual update or perhaps a question about the guest list. Instead, Dustin was on the line with her, their voices blending as they spoke almost in unison, at first explaining that they had been finalizing details late into the night. Miranda took the lead, her tone measured and careful. "Courtney, we've been going over the schedule and the photos, and we really want the ceremony and formal shots to have a specific feel. Dustin's family is bringing a lot of high-profile guests, business partners, distant relatives flying in, and we need to keep everything looking cohesive." Dustin added smoothly that they had decided it would be best if I joined only for the reception afterward. "The vows and the portraits are going to be more curated," he explained. "We don't want anything to disrupt the image we're creating for the day." Miranda closed by saying, they hoped I understood it was about the overall presentation, nothing personal, and that they still wanted me there for the celebration part. I listened in silence, the words settling over me like a cold weight. They weren't asking for my thoughts or offering compromise. They were delivering a decision that had already been made, wrapped in polite language that couldn't quite hide the finality. When they paused, waiting for a response, I simply said, "I see." There was no outburst, no pleading, no attempt to change their minds. I thanked them for letting me know, wished them luck with the remaining preparations, and ended the call. Cheyenne glanced up from her math problems and asked if everything was okay. I forced a smile and told her yes, everything was fine, then helped her finish the worksheet. That night, after tucking her in and turning off the lights, I sat alone in the quiet living room with my laptop open on the coffee table. The hurt was immediate and deep, the realization that they had deemed me unsuitable for the most sacred parts of the day, the ceremony where vows would be exchanged, the family photos that would capture the moment forever. It wasn't just about missing an event. It was about being told in no uncertain terms that I didn't belong in the version of family they wanted to present to the world. For years, I had absorbed the slights made excuses stayed in the background to keep peace. This time, the exclusion felt absolute. Instead of letting the pain consume me, I turned it inward, letting it fuel something sharper and more controlled. I opened my files and began researching Harold Morales' company in earnest. Morales Resorts was a solid mid-size luxury hospitality group with several properties across Colorado, upscale lodges and boutique hotels known for their mountain views, private spas, and premium service aimed at affluent travelers. Public filings, annual reports, and industry analyses were all available online, and I spent the next several nights reviewing them carefully. The company had expanded aggressively in recent years, adding new developments that required consistent capital and stable governance. I knew from my own experience in investment that quiet accumulation could shift influence without drawing attention. I contacted a few trusted colleagues from previous deals, people who understood discretion and long-term strategy. We discussed potential opportunities in private, focusing on shareholder interests and fiscal responsibility. Through a holding firm I had established years earlier, we began acquiring shares methodically, small blocks, at first then larger positions as opportunities arose. The process was deliberate and legal, thorough due diligence negotiations with existing shareholders, and a closing that happened quietly just before the wedding season intensified. No announcements were made. No headlines appeared. The majority stake was secured without fanfare, a move that positioned me to protect value rather than disrupt for personal gain. I never breathed a word of it to Miranda or Dustin. There was no need. The choice to exclude me had been theirs alone. My response was private, calculated, and rooted in the same patience I had always practiced. The pain from that phone call didn't vanish. It lingered like a bruise, but it no longer controlled me. It had become fuel for a different kind of strength, one built on silence and strategy rather than confrontation. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shifting not through anger, but through quiet resolve. The deal had closed quietly before that, and then the wedding day arrived. Warm summer in Fort Collins, June or August, around 25 to 27 degrees. Beautiful sunshine, little rain. The sky was a perfect cloudless blue as I backed out of the driveway, the familiar suburban streets lined with blooming lilacs and freshly mowed lawns. Cheyenne sat in the back seat, her small hand smoothing the skirt of her light blue dress, asking if there would be cake at the party, and if she could dance. I answered with gentle reassurances, telling her it was a special day for Aunt Miranda, but inside my chest, a steady calm had taken hold, the kind that comes after months of silent preparation. The drive to Winsong Estate took about 20 minutes, the road winding past open fields and the distant outline of the foothills. I had chosen this venue for the reception carefully in my mind, not because I was invited to the full event, but because I knew the layout from online photos and reviews. The ceremony itself had been held earlier that morning in the outdoor garden area, a private space with manicured lawns, white chairs arranged in neat rows and mountain views, serving as a natural backdrop. Only the immediate bridal party and select guests had been there for the vows. The reception, however, opened to a wider circle of family and friends, the kind of gathering where people moved freely between the indoor ballroom and the covered patio with its string lights and long tables set for dinner. They had extended me an invitation to this part alone, the after-hours celebration, assuming I would arrive quietly, perhaps, in something understated, confirming every assumption they had made about me. I had chosen differently. The dress I wore was deep navy silk, cut with clean lines that moved gracefully as I walked the fabric, catching the light in subtle ways. It had taken weeks of searching online, late-at-night visits to boutiques in Denver, trying on pieces, until I found the one that felt right, that spoke of quiet confidence rather than desperation. Cheyenne's outfit complemented it, a soft blue dress with delicate details that made her look like a little vision of poise. I wanted her to see me that day, not diminished, not apologetic, but standing tall. I wanted her to understand that we could belong anywhere we chose on our own terms. As I parked in the lot and walked toward the entrance with Cheyenne's hand securely in mine, the sounds of laughter and music drifted out from the open doors. The reception was in full swing, guests mingling between the indoor space and the patio, champagne flutes catching the afternoon sun, conversations rising and falling in easy waves. I paused for a moment at the threshold, taking in the scene, the elegant tables draped in white linen, the floral centerpieces spilling over with soft pastels, the string quartet playing gently in the corner. Then I stepped inside. The change was instantaneous. The music continued, but the energy in the room shifted like a wave breaking. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned slowly at first, then more quickly as recognition spread across faces. The room seemed to hold its breath. I saw Miranda across the space, standing near the head table with Dustin, her gown shimmering in the light. Her smile froze, eyes widening as she registered my presence. Dustin's hand tightened on her arm, his expression shifting from relaxed to stunned in the space of a heartbeat. Guests who had been laughing moments earlier now watched in silence, some with open mouths, others exchanging quick, incredulous glances. I kept walking Cheyenne beside me, her small fingers gripping mine a little tighter as she sensed the sudden stillness. Mom and Dad were seated at a table near the center, Mom in a pale lavender dress that matched the floral theme, Dad in his best suit. When they saw me, Mom's hand rose to her mouth, her face draining of color. Dad looked away almost immediately, staring at the tablecloth as if it held some important secret. They didn't stand. They didn't wave. They simply sat there, the gap between us suddenly visible to every person in the room. Whispers started softly carrying through the hush, low murmurs of surprised confusion, a few sharp intakes of breath. Some guests leaned toward each other, eyes flicking back to me, trying to reconcile the woman they had expected to arrive in defeat with the one now moving through the space with steady purpose. Cheyenne looked up at me, her brows slightly furrowed, but I squeezed her hand gently and kept my pace, even letting the silence do the talking. The moment stretched longer than I expected. No one approached. No one offered a warm greeting. The room remained suspended, caught between the expectation of my absence and the undeniable reality of my arrival. I felt every pair of eyes, every hushed word, but I didn't falter. This was the moment they hadn't anticipated, the single mother they thought would show up. Diminished head bowed now, standing in a dress that spoke of quiet power with my daughter at my side, as living proof that I had built something beautiful from what they had dismissed. I found a spot near the edge of the room, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, and let the weight of their surprise settle over the space. Cheyenne glanced around curiously, then up at me again, and I smiled down at her, whispering that everything was all right. In that suspended silence, with the room still frozen around us, I felt something profound settle inside me. Not anger, not vengeance, but a deep, unshakable certainty that I no longer needed their invitation to claim my place. Not long after the wedding, in the 1 to 3 months that followed, the first ripples of consequence began to surface. It started with a message from Dustin on a quiet Thursday evening. The text arrived while I was making dinner for Cheyenne, the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and herbs. "Courtney, I need to talk. Things are happening at the company. Can we meet?" The words were short, but the urgency beneath them was unmistakable. I read the message twice, then set the phone down and finished stirring the sauce. I didn't reply immediately. I let the request sit there unanswered while I considered what this moment truly represented. A few days later, he called. His voice carried none of the polished assurance I remembered from the reception. It was tighter-edged with worry. He asked if we could meet in person somewhere away from Fort Collins. I suggested a small independent coffee shop in Denver with outdoor seating and enough privacy to speak freely. He agreed without hesitation. The drive south on I-25 took about 1 hour and 10 minutes, the highway cutting through open plains under a wide autumn sky. Traffic was light, and I drove with the windows cracked, letting the cool air clear my thoughts. This wasn't about settling scores or proving a point. It was about the natural unfolding of decisions made long before. We met on a weekday afternoon when the place was nearly empty. Dustin was already there, seated at a corner table with a black coffee cooling in front of him. He stood when I approached, looking more worn than I expected, the easy confidence from the wedding replaced by something closer to fatigue. We sat, exchanged brief greetings, and then he got straight to the heart of it. "I know you own the majority of shares in my father's company," he said quietly, his eyes searching mine. "How did that happen? And what are you planning?" I took a slow breath and answered honestly. I explained that I had been investing for years, building a portfolio through a discreet holding firm, and that Morales Resorts had emerged as a logical opportunity. The acquisitions had been methodical and entirely legal. Gradual purchases of shares through standard market channels, negotiations with existing shareholders, and a final closing that transferred control without any public announcement. I had become the majority shareholder quietly, a position that allowed me to influence board decisions when the company's direction required review. Dustin listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from disbelief to a heavier understanding. When I finished, he leaned forward and asked what my intentions were. I told him the truth. My focus was on protecting shareholder value. The company had been pushing an ambitious resort expansion project. New luxury properties in prime Colorado locations, developments that carried significant debt and required careful capital management. The board, now fully aware of the ownership change, had initiated a fiscal stabilization review. They voted to halt the expansion pending a thorough reassessment of debt levels, cash flow projections, and long-term sustainability. It was a standard corporate action, the kind that happens regularly in boardrooms to safeguard the company's future rather than chase rapid growth at any cost. Harold Morales was feeling the impact. The project he had personally championed, the one intended to cement the family legacy and expand their footprint across the state, was now on indefinite hold. His position as chairman had grown more precarious, with other board members raising questions about strategic direction under his leadership. Dustin described the tension in hushed tones, late-night strategy sessions, strained family conversations, the pressure mounting from investors who wanted stability over ambition. He didn't accuse me directly. He simply laid out the facts, as if hoping I might offer some explanation or reversal. I didn't. I told him the decisions were not driven by personal grudge. They were rooted in fiduciary responsibility, the board's duty to act in the best interest of all shareholders. The halt was necessary for the company's health, a measured step to prevent overextension. I didn't bring up the phone call from 3 months earlier, the one where they had decided I didn't belong in the ceremony or the photos. I didn't need to. The connection was there, implicit but undeniable. Dustin sat back, staring out at the street for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "This is going to change a lot for my family." I nodded slowly. "Change is part of any business," I said. "Sometimes it's required to keep things strong." We finished our coffee in silence. He didn't ask for concessions. He didn't plead for leniency. He simply thanked me for meeting him, stood, and walked away. As I drove back north to Fort Collins, the highway stretching under the fading afternoon light, a quiet calm settled over me. The pain from the months of exclusion hadn't disappeared. It still lingered like a shadow in quiet moments, but it no longer defined me. The consequences unfolding were not something I had engineered out of malice. They were the logical outcome of choices made earlier, choices to dismiss, to exclude, to assume I would always remain in the background without question. I had simply chosen to step forward in the one arena where my voice carried weight. I thought about Cheyenne waiting at home, about the life I had built for us through years of steady effort. I thought about the family I had supported for so long, the one that had gradually pushed me aside. And I realized that the balance had shifted not through confrontation or drama, but through the simple, inevitable truth that actions have outcomes. For the first time, I felt neither anger nor satisfaction, but a profound sense of equilibrium. The path ahead was clear, and I would walk it on my own terms. The consequences unfolded steadily in the months that followed the wedding. Harold Morales stepped down from his position as chairman on a temporary basis, a decision reached by the board after careful internal review. The fiscal stabilization measures that had paused the resort expansion project continued to guide the company's direction, leading to the loss of several major contracts that had been in advanced negotiation. These partnerships didn't disappear amid any dramatic scandal. They simply slipped away as clients and investors chose more stable options, reassessing risks in light of the company's recalibrated priorities. Harold's influence, once commanding and unquestioned, gradually diminished as the board sought new leadership to steer through the changed circumstances. The Morales family's social standing shifted in visible ways. Invitations to exclusive galas, charity events, and private gatherings became increasingly rare. The circles they had navigated with ease began to close around them, leaving them on the outside. They sold their large home in the upscale foothills and moved to a more modest house in a quieter suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Fort Collins. The transition was practical, driven by financial necessity, but it carried the deeper weight of reduced circumstances. Miranda and Dustin adjusted accordingly. The frequent vacations, the designer wardrobe, the effortless extravagance gave way to more restrained choices. They no longer hosted lavish gatherings or appeared at every prominent occasion. The lifestyle they had known receded, replaced by a simpler routine that felt smaller in every respect. I observed it all from a deliberate distance. When messages arrived, first hesitant, then more direct, asking to talk, to explain, to find some path forward, I chose not to respond. I blocked the numbers not out of bitterness, but out of the calm recognition that some boundaries must remain firm. The space I had once filled with patience and quiet support now belonged entirely to my daughter and myself. Cheyenne thrived in the steady rhythm we built together. She excelled at her local school, her grades consistently strong, and her teachers praising her focus and kindness. She joined a soccer league on weekends, running across the field with pure joy, her laughter ringing out as she chased the ball. I watched from the sidelines, cheering quietly, feeling a deep gratitude for the life we had nurtured without apology or compromise. My own work continued to grow in its measured way. The investment firm I had developed over the years expanded steadily, new clients arriving through referrals and reliable results. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth to anyone outside my immediate circle. The years of carrying more than my share, of being the dependable one who asked for little in return, had taught me something profound. Value is not granted by others. It is claimed through consistent effort, quiet integrity, and the courage to set boundaries when they are crossed. The story ends here, not with reconciliation or dramatic forgiveness, but with a deliberate and permanent break. There was no final conversation, no tearful reunion, no attempt to mend what had been irreparably fractured. The distance became absolute, and, in that absoluteness, I found a peace I had never known before. I had been pushed aside, labeled dismissed, but I had chosen to step away on my own terms, carrying my worth intact and uncompromised. If you have stayed with me until the end, thank you. Thank you for listening to this story with an open heart and an attentive ear. It means more than words can express to know that someone truly heard it, from the quiet sacrifices of the past to the steady reclaiming of my place in the present. Family drama like this leaves deep marks, but it also offers lessons that endure. One of the most important is this: when we treat others with consistent disrespect, the consequences arrive not always with noise or spectacle, but always with inevitability. And the greatest power we possess is the ability to recognize our own value, to build a life that honors who we are, even when the world around us refuses to see it. I hope this story reminds you that no one can truly erase you, no matter how hard they try. You deserve respect, space, and peace. If anything here resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to draw a line with family to protect your own worth? What did you learn along the way? Your experiences matter, and I read every single one. Thank you again for being here until the very end. Your presence made this story feel less solitary.